Trigger warning, today's episode is about the disappearance of a 3-year-old child. We're going to discuss some of the abduction, a suspect's separate convictions for sexual offenses against adults and children, and the last. If any of this is difficult for you right now, come back to it at another time or listen with someone you trust. Bye. As always on the show, nothing here is intended for young listeners. Before we begin tonight's story, we'd like to ask you to do something a little different. Instead of thinking about the investigation or the trial or the headlines as we talk through this, we'd like you to think about the people. Sources for this episode consist of the BBC News, Wikipedia, ITV News, the Portugal News, BC, Netflix, and Kate McCann's memoir book. This is an active, ongoing investigation.
On the 3rd of May, 2007, a 3-year-old girl went to sleep on a ground floor apartment in a Portuguese holiday resort. Her parents were having dinner less than 100 yards away. When her mother checked on her at 10 o'clock that night, Madeleine McCann was gone.
No sign of forced entry, no scream anyone remembers hearing, no body, no confession, no trial, not for the disappearance itself anyway, in 19 years.
This is Don't Tell the Kids, the show where two moms, one of us in America, the other in Canada, get on a call every week and dig into the true crime cases we cannot stop thinking about. I'm Sam from the US.
And I'm Paige from Canada. This show basically started with us texting each other anyway, 2 different time zones, comparing notes on whatever case was stuck in our heads this week, and realizing that talking about it as moms, not as true crime experts, not as journalists, changed what we actually noticed in these stories. So that's the lens we bring in every episode, and this one's no exception.
Quick note before we start, on top of that trigger warning, this episode deals with the disappearance of a child. We're going to handle it carefully, and we're going to stick with what actually was documented in police files, court records, sworn testimony, reporting from outlets that were there. Whenever something is a theory or allegation rather than fact, we're going to say this.
Also, we're going to do our best at pronouncing everything properly. It's also worth saying up front, the prime suspect in this case has never been charged with anything related to Madeleine McCann. He denies any involvement. We'll get into exactly where the investigation stands as of this recording, but we're not in the business of trying someone in a podcast. Innocent until proven guilty applies here, same as anywhere else.
With that said, let's go back to the beginning. Praia da Luz on Algarve, coast of Portugal, spring of 2007. Okay, so set the scene for me. Who are the McCanns, and how did they end up in Portugal that week?
So Kate and Jerry McCann, she was a GP, general practitioner. He was a cardiologist from Rothley, a village in Leicestershire, England. Kate had trained as an anesthetist before switching to general practice. Both are working professionals, both from Scotland originally, both very used to structure and routine, which actually becomes relevant later in how they conduct themselves under enormous public scrutiny.
And the kids.
So the kids, 3 children, Madeleine, who had just turned 3 in May of that year, and the younger twins, a boy and a girl, about 2 years old at the time. In late April 2007, the McCanns booked a week's holiday at the Ocean Club, a resort complex in Praia da Luz, a small, fairly quiet coastal town in the western Algarve, popular with British holidaymakers, a lot of retirees and families, so not really a huge nighttime social scene.
So a pretty unremarkable family holiday.
Completely unremarkable. They traveled with a group of friends, 7 adults total, including Kate and Jerry, plus their children, all staying at the same resort. This group becomes known later in the press coverage as the Tapas 9, because in the evenings, the adults would eat at the tapas restaurant on the resort grounds, while the children slept in their nearby apartments.
Walk me through the apartment setup, because the geography of this actually matters a lot in how the evening unfolds.
Right, it does. So the McCanns were staying in a ground floor apartment, number 5A, part of a block of holiday apartments within that resort. The tapas restaurant where the adults ate was around 50 to 55 meters away, so roughly the length of a half of a football pitch. Close enough to walk to in under a minute, close enough that from certain vantage points at the restaurant you could just about see the apartment block, but not close enough to hear a child's cry from the inside of a closed apartment, especially with the restaurant full of conversations and clinking glasses around you.
And this was in a hotel with an on-site crochet or babysitting service that night, right?
The resort did offer a kids club and babysitting services during the day, and the McCann children had been to the kids club during parts of that week. But in the evenings, the routine the group had fallen into, and this has been the pattern for the previous few nights of the holiday too, was that the parents would put the children to bed in their own apartments and then take turns walking back every 20 or 30 minutes or so to check on them, rather than using a paid babysitter for the whole weekend.
What was the place like as a town for people who've never been?
So this place is actually really cool, and I can picture it in my mind, but small, whitewashed, built around a crescent of beach with a fort at one end and a handful of restaurants and cafes along a promenade, mostly frequented by British and Irish tourists and a substantial community of British expats who live there year-round. It's the kind of place where, in 2007, most residents knew each other, at least by sight, and where a stranger sticking around for any length of time might plausibly be noticed, which is part of why the idea of a targeted or opportunist offender who already had local knowledge of the area became such a significant thread in the investigation.
So not an isolated, sprawling resort where a stranger could move around totally unnoticed.
Which cuts both ways investigatively. It made nobody saw anything. More puzzling. But it also meant that anyone who did know the town, its layout, and its rhythms would have had an advantage in moving through it, in and out, without drawing any attention.
How common was that, practically among that group?
It was apparently pretty standard for this crowd on this kind of holidays. Several of the families in the group were doing the same monitoring approach that week. It's one of the things that came under intense scrutiny afterwards, and understandably so, but it's worth saying it wasn't seen as unusual or reckless at the time by the people involved. It's the kind of informal system that a lot of parents on that kind of resort holiday might recognize. So that's the world we're in on the evening of May the 3rd. A warm, ordinary Thursday at a quiet Portuguese resort. A group of friends about to go out for dinner, and 3 young children asleep, or about to be asleep, in 2 neighboring ground floor apartments.
Okay, take me through the night itself, hour by hour, as best as we can reconstruct it.
Okay, so around 6:30 that evening, Kate had put Madeleine and the twins to bed in apartment 5A. Jerry had described reading Madeleine part of a Harry Potter book before she fell asleep. By around 8:30 p.m., the parents left for dinner at the tapas restaurant, leaving the children asleep, with the apartment door pulled closed, but, and this detail does matter, unlocked, so they could go back and forth quickly on their checks.
And the checking pattern that night was?
According to the accounts given by the group, various members of the party, Jerry included, walked back to check on the children roughly every half hour throughout the evening. Jerry has said he checked around 9:05 p.m. and everything was normal. Another member of the group, Matthew Oldfield, checked around 9:30, glanced in without going all the way inside, and also reported seeing or hearing nothing unusual, though he later said he didn't specifically look at Madeleine's bed from where he stood. Then at 10 p.m., Kate went back to check. She described going in, finding the bedroom door open wider than when she had left it, the windows and shutters in the bedroom open, and Madeleine's bed empty. The twins were still asleep in their cots.
What did she do in that first moment?
By her own accord and the accounts of others present, she ran back to the restaurant, telling the group Madeleine was missing, and Jerry went straight to the apartment. Within a short time, reports vary on how long, but it was fast. The group searched the surrounding grounds and alerted resort staff, and then the Portuguese police were called.
What's the state of the apartment itself when it's first properly examined?
This becomes one of the most enduring points of criticism on the whole case, the initial handling of the scene. The shutters to the bedroom window were found open, and there was debate for years about whether they had been forced or tampered with, or whether they'd simply been left that way and could be opened relatively easily from the outside without force, which some reporting and expert examination later suggested when possible, given the design of the shutters. There were no definitive physical evidence or forced entry that police were ever able to find or point to conclusively.
No broken glass, no pried window frame, nothing like that.
Nothing that unambiguously said someone broke in here, which is part of why, for years, theories diverged so widely. Everything from a stranger abduction through the window to an opportunistic intruder who found the door or window already accessible, to darker theories about people already known to the family, all the way to Gonzalo Amaral's theory, which we'll get into later, that there was no abduction at all.
What about immediate searches that night? Dogs, roadblocks, that kind of thing.
This is another major point of criticism looking back. The initial local police response was relatively limited in the scale for the first several hours. Search parties, some perimeter checks, questioning of resort staff and guests, but Portugal did not have an Amber Alert child abduction alert system at that point, and there was no immediate large-scale roadblock or border alert operation in those crucial first hours, the way there might have been in the UK or for the US for a stranger abduction scenario today.
So potentially a lot of time lost right at the very start.
That's the widely held view, yes, that the first 24 to 48 hours, which are statistically the most critical window in any abduction case, were not used as effectively as they might have been, partly because of resourcing, partly because Portuguese police initially treated it reasonably enough given the lack of any obvious break-in evidence, any ambiguous case, rather than any immediate confirmed abduction. So we've got Madeleine missing as of around 10 p.m. on the 3rd. Let's talk about how the investigation actually develops in those first days and weeks.
Who's leading it?
The lead detective for the Policia Judiciaria, Portugal's version of a serious crimes investigative police force, was Gonzalo Amaral, a name that becomes very significant later for reasons that have nothing to do with finding Madeleine and everything to do with what he said publicly afterward. In the first days, though, he's running a fairly conventional missing child / possible abduction investigation, canvassing the resort, interviewing the Tapas 9 individually, interviewing resort staff, and putting out a description.
What did that early description look like? Is that where the famous eye detail comes in?
Yes, it does actually. Madeleine had a distinctive marking, a small dark spot in her right eye, a defect of her iris, which became a key identifying feature used in appeals and citing reports for years afterwards, because it made her potentially identifiable even from a distance or in a partial description.
And Robert Murat, this is where he enters the story.
Robert Murat was a British-Portuguese property consultant living locally in a house that was about 150 yards from the McCann's apartment. He approached journalists and police in the days after the disappearance, offering help to be a translator, since he spoke Portuguese fluently and a lot of the British press and police liaisons needed local language help. Within about a week and a half, on the 14th of May, he was made an arguido. That's the Portuguese legal status, roughly translated as formal suspect or person of interest under caution, which comes with certain legal rights and restrictions, but is not the same as being charged with a crime.
What put him under suspicion?
A combination of his proximity to the apartment, some inconsistencies press reports raised about his account of his movements that night, and frankly, a media environment that, within days, had become a feeding frenzy for any name attached to the case. Murat always denied any involvement. Ultimately, no evidence was ever found linking him to Madeleine's disappearance, and his aguardo status was formally lifted when the Portuguese authorities archived the whole case in July 2008. He later won substantial libel damages for several British tabloids over the coverage.
That's a theme that's going to come up again and again in this case, isn't it? Tabloid coverage getting way ahead of the actual evidence.
Constantly in this case. This was arguably one of the first missing child cases of the social media adjacent era. Facebook existed, camera phones were everywhere, 24-hour news were hungry for content, and the appetite for the story massively outpaced the actual rate at which verified information was coming out of the investigation. That gap got filled with speculation, and a lot of people got hurt by it, including people who turned out to have absolutely nothing to do with what happened.
Let's talk about the sniffer dogs, because that becomes a significant piece of this story as well.
It does. In August 2007, months into the investigation, British police brought in 2 specially trained dogs from South Yorkshire Police, a cadaver dog named Eddie, trained to detect the scent of human remains, and a dog named Keela, trained to detect blood traces after cleaning. Eddie reportedly gave an alert in the McCann's apartment, specifically around the area near where Madeleine's bed had been, and separately in the trunk or boot of a rental car the McCanns had hired, but not until about 3 weeks after the disappearance.
What does an alert like that actually mean evidentially?
This is crucial and often gotten wrong in casual retellings. A dog alert is an indicator, not proof. It tells investigators there may be a scent consistent with what I'm trained to detect here, which then needs to be followed up with forensic testing. Samples were taken and sent to the forensic lab in Birmingham, England, for a more detailed analysis. The results were inconclusive. Some samples showed possible traces of DNA that could not definitively be matched to Madeleine or excluded either, given degraded sample quality. Portuguese authorities and the McCanns' own supporters have long argued that dog evidence was misinterpreted, contaminated, or simply insufficient to draw firm conclusions from. It was never treated by any court as proof of anything, but it fed years of theorizing.
Let's talk about the eyewitnesses, because there were a couple of specific sighting reports from that night that became very significant to the early theory of this case.
The most cited is what's usually called the Tanner sighting. Jane Tanner, one of the group of friends dining with the McCanns that night, reported that around 9:15, while walking back from the restaurant from checking on her own child, she saw a man carrying a child in what she described as pajamas walking away from the direction of the apartments toward the beach road. She didn't think much of it at the moment, assumed it was just another parent, but came forward with the detail once Madeleine was reported missing.
And how seriously was that taken?
Extremely seriously. Initially, it became the basis for one of the earliest circulated E-Fit sketches, the Smithman or the Tanner Man composite, released to the public and press within days. But over time, it became a source of real controversy within the investigation itself. Some other witnesses gave accounts that were hard to fully reconcile with the timeline Tanner described. And Gonzalo Amaral, in his own theory of the case, argued the sighting didn't hold up to scrutiny at all. It was never conclusively verified, and the man in question, if he existed as described, was never identified or traced with certainty, though appeals for him to come forward continued for years.
And there was later a reconstruction effort too, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. So in May 2013, the BBC's Crime Watch program aired a special dedicated to the case, timed to the 6th anniversary, featuring a detailed reconstruction of the evening and a new, more refined E-Fit of a man British police wanted to trace, described as someone seen carrying a child near the resort. That broadcast generated a significant spike in tips. Reportedly, several hundred new pieces of information came in within days, and is generally credited with helping build momentum towards Operation Grange's more intensive plan. But like so much else in this case, none of the leads generated from it produced a confirmed identification.
This is the part of the story that I think a lot of people find the most uncomfortable, even now, the period where Kate and Jerry McCann themselves were formally treated as suspects.
Yeah, very uncomfortable. In September 2007, about 4 months in, both Kate and Jerry McCann were made arguidos. This followed the emergence of that inconclusive dog alert evidence and a theory publicly floated by Gonzalo Amaral that Madeleine had died in that apartment, possibly in some kind of accident, and that the parents had then staged the abduction to cover it up, including allegedly using the rental car to move and later dispose of a body, which was never found.
Was there ever any physical evidence to support that theory?
No, No confirmed physical evidence was ever produced that substantiated it. The case was ultimately archived by the Portugal Attorneys General in July 2008 for lack of evidence, both against the McCanns and against Robert Murat. And their arguido status was formally lifted at that point. The McCanns have always and consistently denied any involvement in their daughter's disappearance, and no Portuguese or British authorities has, at any point since, formally reasserted suspicion against them as part of the active investigation.
But that theory didn't go away.
It sure didn't, largely because of Gonçalo Amaral himself. After being removed from leading the investigation in October of 2007, officially for comments he made to the newspaper, criticizing how British police were handling their side of things, Amaral went on in 2008 to publish a book called A Verdade de Mentira, translated as The Truth of a Lie, in which he had laid out his theory that Madeleine died in the apartment and that the parents were involved in concealing it.
How did the McCanns respond to that?
Well, they actually sued him for libel in both Portugal and in related action over an English language documentary based on the book. It became a long drawn out legal battle. Portuguese courts initially sided with the McCanns and had the book taken off shelves and awarded in damages, but that ruling was appealed by Amaral, and Portugal's Supreme Court ultimately overturned it in 2017, ruling that Amaral's right to free expression and his standing as a former lead investigator, giving his professional opinion, protected the book's publication, even though the theory in it was never proven. That was obviously an enormous painful outcome for the McCann family, and it's part of why, for this segment of the public, even today, that this idea that parents were somehow involved persists, even though it was never substantiated by evidence and the case against them was formally closed.
Before we move past this, there's a specific incident that I think is worth including because it shows how far the relationship between the McCanns and the Portuguese investigation had deteriorated by that point. Portuguese police requested that the family and the rest of the group return to Praia da Luz to participate in a formal reconstruction of the events of that evening, standard investigative practice in a lot of European jurisdictions. The McCanns declined to participate, on the advice of their lawyers, citing concerns about how it would be used given they were formally suspects at the time. Portuguese police and press were sharply critical of that refusal.
Right, and the McCann side of that has always been that participating in a reconstruction while under arguido status, with the case's lead investigator publicly suggesting they were involved, could have exposed them to further legal jeopardy, regardless of their innocence, which is a fairly standard legal calculation lawyers make in that position. But it's a good example of how nearly every decision in this case, including ones with defensible legal logic behind them, got read by parts of the public as suspicious in itself.
And then the case was formally closed not long after that.
Yeah, in July 2008, Portugal's Attorney General's office announced the case was being archived, meaning shelved due to insufficient evidence to proceed against anyone, which technically remaining reopenable if new evidence emerged. Arguido status was lifted for both the McCanns and Robert Murat at that point. It's worth being precise about what archive means in the Portuguese system. It is not an acquittal, it's not a declaration of innocence in a formal legal sense, but it's an official acknowledgement that prosecutors did not have a case that could realistically proceed.
I think it's worth just sitting with that for a second because it's easy in true crime content to skate past it. An official investigator published a theory implicating grieving parents without ever producing proof, and the legal system ultimately protected his right to say it, rather than ruling on whether it was true. There's one more minor figure from those early months worth a quick mention because it illustrates just how wide the net of suspicion this cast in that period.
You're thinking of Sergio Malinka.
I am.
A local computer technician who had actually been hired, ironically, to help set up some of the McCann's equipment and had done some work for Robert Murat as well. Because of his association with Murat, he briefly became under police scrutiny and intense press speculation in the same window Murat did in mid-May 2007. Nothing was ever found connecting him to the case either, and like Murat, he was left dealing with the reputational fallout of tabloid coverage that named and photographed him before any of that scrutiny had produced anything. He's frequently cited along Murat in later discussions of the case as an example of the collateral damage caused by the speed and aggression of the early press coverage. And that's a genuinely important distinction. The courts in the libel case weren't ruling immoral, it was correct. They were ruling on freedom of expression grounds. The underlying factual question, what actually happened to Madeleine, which never resolved by the litigation at all.
What was the broader public and media climate like for the McCanns during that period?
It was very intense and often vicious. They faced sustained tabloid scrutiny, accusations, conspiracy theories accusing them of anything from staged accidents to involvement in organized abuse networks, none of which had any credible evidentiary basis. Alongside, it has to be said, an enormous outpouring of public sympathy and support globally, fundraising efforts in the Find Madeleine campaign, which the family established and which continued to fund private investigator efforts for years, including hiring private detectives where they felt Portuguese and British police efforts had stalled.
Did the private investigations turn anything up?
Not conclusively. Various private investigators were hired over the years, pursued various leads and theories, some credible, some fairly far-fetched. None produced the breakthrough the family was hoping for. But the sustained public pressure and campaigning is a big part of why the case never faded from the public consciousness, the way most missing persons cases unfortunately do.
Were any of those private investigations controversial in their own right?
A couple, yes. Early on, the family engaged a Spanish firm called Metido 3, which was paid a substantial sum and pursued various leads, including at one point promoting theories about organized trafficking networks operating out of North Africa, none of which produced verified results, and the relationship eventually ended. Later, the family engaged a private investigator named Kevin Halligan through a UK-based firm, and that relationship also became a source of controversy. Halligan was later convicted in an entirely separate matter, unrelated to his work on the Madeleine case, of fraud in the United States. None of these entanglements produced evidence about what happened to Madeleine, but they did generate their own cycle of press scrutiny and occasional public questioning, and how the fund's money donated by well-wishers around the world was being spent.
Did the scrutiny go anywhere formally?
There was a charity commission and separately police review of the fund's finances at points, given it was operating as a registered fund soliciting public donations, and it was found to have been administered properly, with spending accounted for. But it's another example of how, in this case, with this much public attention and this much money and emotion involved, virtually every decision the family made was picked apart in public in ways most grieving families are mercifully spared. Let's talk about the sheer scale of the search for Madeleine, because I don't think people always appreciate how enormous this became.
Give me the numbers.
Over the years, this became arguably one of the most investigated missing person cases of modern history. Reported sightings of a child matching Madeleine's description came in from dozens of countries: Morocco, Australia, Belgium, the Netherlands, various parts of the United States, all over Europe. Police in multiple countries fielded and had to access thousands of individual tips. The vast majority led nowhere, but each one had to be taken seriously enough to at least be evaluated, which consumed enormous investigative resources over the years.
Any of those sightings ever get close to credible?
A handful generated significant media attention. A sighting in Morocco not long after the disappearance, reports out of the Netherlands and Belgium in following years, and periodically claims resurface even now, including cases where women who resemble age-progressed images of Madeleine had to be tracked down, and in every instance so far, definitively ruled out through identity verification, DNA, or documentation of their actual life history. As recently as the past several years, there have been individual cases of young women publicly wondering if they might be Madeleine, which were investigated and disproven.
That's such a strange and specific kind of tragedy that the case is famous enough that people genuinely wonder about where their own identity because of it.
It really is. It speaks to how deeply this case penetrated public consciousness globally, not just in Britain.
Let's talk about Operation Grange, because that's the formal name of the UK's involvement.
Right. So worth clarifying the jurisdictional picture first. Madeleine disappeared in Portugal, so the primary criminal investigation was and remains a Portuguese one, led by the Polícia Judiciária. But given that the family and 8 of the 9 other adults involved were British, there was enormous public and political pressure in the UK to be actively involved. In May 2011, then Home Secretary Theresa May authorized Scotland Yard, the Metropolitan Police, to conduct a formal review of the case, which became Operation Grange.
And what did Grange actually do differently?
It wasn't just a reread of the existing file. Operation Grange, at its peak, involved around 30 detectives and support staff, and it approached the case essentially as a fresh review, cross-referencing all existing evidence, all persons of interest, all timelines, looking specifically for gaps or leads that hadn't been fully pursued. It's worth saying Operation Grange had been and continues to be expensive and for a long time produced no breakthrough, which drew some criticism in the UK press about the cost versus results, reportedly running into many millions of pounds over its lifetime.
Did it produce anything concrete before we get into Bruckner?
It's credited with re-examining the timeline more rigorously, working more closely with Portuguese authorities that had sometimes been the case in earlier years, and it did lead to a significant, if grim, development in 2014 when Operation Grange officers, working off a theory about a possible burglar operating in that area, publicized an appeal specifically about a man seen carrying a child near the resort that night. Through that particular line, like so many others, that ultimately didn't resolve the case. The bigger turning point comes in 2020. German public prosecutors in Braunschweig announced in June of 2020 that they were treating Bruckner as a suspect specifically in Madeleine's disappearance and presumed death. This was a genuinely significant moment in this case. For the first time in over a decade, that a named individual, well-documented prior offenses, and documented presence in that area had been publicly identified by a serious prosecuting attorney as a suspect specifically.
What evidence has actually been laid out against him?
German and British investigators have pointed to several strands: his residence and known presence in the region at the relevant time, testimony from acquaintances of his describing statements he allegedly made suggesting knowledge or of involvement in the case, the phone data placing him nearby that evening, and his broader pattern of offending, which prosecutors argued showed a modus operandi consistent with opportunistic entry into properties and sexual offenses against women and children. It's important to say plainly, this is a body of circumstantial and testimonial evidence that German prosecutors found compelling enough to name him publicly as a suspect. It's not the same as a criminal conviction, and Bruckner has consistently and explicitly denied any involvement in Madeleine's disappearance.
Has he ever been formally charged specifically over Madeleine's disappearance?
As of this recording, no. He has never been charged by German, Portuguese, or British authorities, specifically in relation to Madeleine McCann. He has separately been convicted of other serious sexual offenses in Germany, including the 2019 conviction for raping a 72-year-old American tourist in Praia da Luz in 2005, 2 years before Madeleine's disappearance, in the same town, for which he received a 7-year prison sentence.
So he's a convicted violent sex offender with a documented history in that exact location, but not a convicted or even charged party in the Madeleine McCann case itself.
That's precisely the distinction, and it's one worth being careful and precise about, because it's very easy in casual conversation about this case to collapse prime suspect into guilty, and legally speaking, that gap has never been closed.
Okay, let's talk honestly about the gap between what's documented and what's theorized, because I think that's actually the most useful thing that we can do to offer listeners on a case that's saturated with so much speculation.
Agreed. So, documented facts. A 3-year-old girl disappeared from her bed in an unlocked ground floor apartment on the evening of May 3rd, 2007. There is no confirmed physical evidence establishing exactly how she left that room, whether by her own movement, being carried out by someone, or some combination. There is no body, no confirmed remains, and no forensic proof of death, though authorities in multiple countries have, at various points over the years, operated on a working presumption that she is likely deceased without ever being confirmed.
That's worth pausing on. The case has never been legally resolved as either a confirmed death or a confirmed live abduction with an ongoing captivity. It sits with this genuinely unresolved space.
Correct, and that's part of what makes it so different from a lot of true crime cases we cover, where at minimum there's a resolved fact pattern, even if a perpetrator was never found. Here, even the basic what happened, did Madeleine wander out and something opportunistic occurred, or was she taken deliberately and specifically targeted? Was there any involvement, however remote, from anyone already known in the family's orbit? None of this is settled with full certainty even now.
Talk me through the main competing theories as fairly as we can.
Broadly, there are 3 buckets. First, the stranger abduction theory, which is where the current Bruckner focus investigation sits, that an opportunistic or targeting predator already known to be operating sexual offenses in the area entered the apartment and took her. Second, the accidental death and cover-up theory, which is Amaro's theory, that something happened to Madeleine within that apartment, possibly an accident, and that the parents concealed it, staged an abduction narrative, and disposed of remains. Third, a broader catch-all of organized trafficking or targeted crime theories, which have circulated extensively online for years, but which no serious law enforcement body has ever substantiated with evidence.
How should we weigh those, given everything that we just walked through?
On the evidence that's actually been made public and tested through any kind of official or legal process, the accidental death theory has never been supported by physical evidence, which was the subject of a case that was formally archived for lack of evidence against the parents, and its most prominent proponent's book was protected on free expression grounds rather than vindicated as fact. The organized trafficking theories remain, as far as any public records show, unsubstantiated speculation. The stranger theory abduction theory, focused specifically on Bruckner, is one of the ones that actual state prosecutorial backing, ongoing surveillance resources being spent on, and reported movement towards formal charges, but even that has not yet cleared the bar of a charge, let alone a conviction.
So if we're being disciplined about it, the honest answer is still, we don't conclusively know, even while acknowledging the investigative weight has shifted heavily and durably toward one particular scenario over the last 5 or 6 years.
That's the fair summary, yes.
Can we talk about the is she still alive question directly? Because I know that's something a lot of listeners will be wondering, and it's rarely addressed head on.
It's worth addressing carefully. No official body has ever declared Madeleine legally dead, and her parents have said publicly at various points over the years that they have not given up hope that she would be alive. That said, most of the investigative resourcing and public statements from lead detectives over roughly the last decade have proceeded on more of a working assumption that she is very likely deceased, given the total absence of any credible confirmed sighting. any ransom demand. There was never a ransom demand, which in itself is a data point investigators have weighed heavily, since ransom is the most extremely low statistical base rate of a child abducted by a stranger in infancy surviving into adulthood undetected for nearly 2 decades.
But it's not impossible, and it's not been ruled out.
It's not impossible, and Kate and Jerry McCann would be the first to tell you as they hold on to that possibility, which is an entirely human and understandable position for a parent to hold, regardless of what statistical probability might suggest.
What about the criticisms of how the initial investigation was run? Do those still hold up in hindsight now that we know so much more?
Largely, yes. The slow initial search response, the contested crime scene preservation, the jurisdictional friction between Portuguese and British police in the early years, the arguably premature focus of the parents based on inconclusive dog alert evidence, those have all been the subject of retrospect criticism from journalists and from some retired police officials.
Is there a broader lesson there about how missing child cases should be handled in that first critical window?
I think most child safety and missing person experts would say yes. This case, alongside others, has been cited in discussions about the need for a faster cross-border alert system, more immediate large-scale search protocols in the first few hours, and clearer international coordination frameworks, specifically because so much of what went wrong here happened in the vagueness of those first 2 or 3 days.
Okay, I want to spend some time on the McCann family themselves because I think it's easy in a case this saturated with true crime content and armchair theorizing to lose sight of the fact that this is, first and foremost, a family whose child has been missing for 19 years.
19 years. Kate and Jerry McCann have never stopped publicly advocating for the search to continue. They set up and continue to run Madeleine's Fund, leaving no stone unturned, later restructured, which has funded private investigative work, awareness campaigns, and support for the broader cause of missing children over the years, beyond just Madeleine's specific case. They marked essentially every anniversary of her disappearance publicly, continued to give interviews at points where there were significant developments, and by all accounts have tried to keep the twins' upbringing as normal and shield as possible, given the extraordinary and unrelenting public nature of their situation. They've generally responded to major developments. In 2020, naming the various court proceedings with public statements expressing that they remain committed to the investigation, that they still hold onto hope, while being notably restrained about commenting on the specifics of an active ongoing legal process, which is reasonable and a legally sensible position for them to take.
What would need to happen for this case to actually reach some kind of legal resolution?
Realistically, one of the few things: German prosecutors succeeding in their appeal and securing a conviction on the related charges, which could strengthen the broader case. The UK's Crown Prosecution Service determining there's sufficient evidence to charge Bruckner specifically over Madeleine's disappearance and successfully extraditing him to stand trial, or less likely but not impossible, after 19 years, some new piece of physical evidence remains: a confession, corroborating forensic material emerging that changes the picture entirely.
And anything absent of that?
Absent of that, the case likely continues in the states it's been in for much of the last 6 years. An actively worked investigation, a named and heavily surveillance suspect, periodic developments that generate headlines, and a family that has now spent nearly 2 decades without answers.
Before we get to the takeaways, let's do the thing we always do on the show: set aside the case file voice for a second and talk about this as moms, because that's genuinely how we process every episode after we've done the research.
Honestly, this one's hard to do any other way. The detail that got me every single time I read about it and did the research wasn't the forensic stuff. It was the checking pattern the parents used that night. Walking back every 20 to 30 minutes wasn't unusual at all. It's what a lot of people do on a resort holiday when the kids are finally asleep and you want 1 hour of adult conversation with people you love.
That's exactly it. And I think that's why this case has stayed lodged in so many parents' heads for 19 years in a way that a lot of true crime doesn't. It's not, how do I avoid the choices that led here, because the choices were so ordinary. It's closer to, there was no choice here and it would have been obviously prevented this. And that's a genuinely uncomfortable thing to sit with as a parent.
I notice how it changes how I read the parts of the story other people fixate on too. When I hear people online being harsh about the McCann's decision to check on the kids rather than pay for a sitter, my first reaction isn't judgment, it's recognition of how many small, reasonable, in the moment parenting decisions any of us make on a given night that we'd never think twice about until something makes you replay every single one.
It's also part of why we were so deliberate earlier about the suspicion versus proof distinction, especially with what happened to Kate and Jerry being made formal suspects. As a mom, imagining living through your child's disappearance and then having that grief treated as a possible cover story, I don't have the adequate words for how that could compound the horror of it all.
Same. And I'll say one other thing that sits with me as a mom specifically. This is Kate McCann's own description of holding onto hope even now, 19 years on. That's not being naive, and it's not denial. It's just what loving a child costs when the story never resolves. I don't think you can fully understand that instinct unless you've felt even a flicker of your own kid being out of your sight for 30 seconds too long in crowded places and what your body does in that moment.
So that's the lens we're bringing to the takeaways. Not what would we have done differently, because that's not really the point. But this story asks us as parents in terms of compassion and how carefully we should hold our own certainty about other families' worst nights.
So, Sam, if you're taking away one thing from this episode, what would it be?
For me, it's the distinction between suspicion and proof, and how much damage gets done when the distinction collapses in public discourse. Whether that's what happened to Robert Murat or the years the McCann spent as formal suspects on evidence that never held up, or the current situation with Bruckner, where there's a strong circumstantial case, but still, as of today, no conviction.
For me, it's just a scale of what unresolved actually means for a family. 19 years and counting of still not knowing. We've talked about a lot of cases on the show that eventually get answers, sometimes decades later. This one hasn't yet, and it might. The appeal in Germany is ongoing. There's apparently a new dossier with UK police as of just a few weeks ago before recording this, and there's real institutional will on at least 2 continents, with still actively pushing on this. So, it's not over.
If you want to follow developments in a case going forward, we'd point you toward established news organizations with dedicated crime correspondents who followed this for years, rather than aggregator content or speculative social media threads. This is a case more than almost any other we've covered, where the gap between rigorous reporting and speculation has caused real documented harm to real people.
That's it. That's going to do it for the episode of Don't Tell the Kids.
Thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the show, the usual places, leave us a review, tell a friend, and we'll catch you next time.
Take care of yourselves.
And remember, don't tell the kids.